This is Anthony Iannarino, author of The Only Sales Guide You Will Ever Need, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with Jon and Pete.
Kicking it off right on a Saturday morning.
You know, Anthony Iannarino is a guy who I consider myself, I have years of experience in sales.
Yeah.
And I've done pretty well at it and made a living at it in much of my life. And yet, there is plenty of room for, just a moment ago, we were exchanging pleasantries, and Anthony said, it's been a while, and it has been a while since we've actually talked mano a mano, but it has not been very long since your influence has been felt and since I've benefited from it. I'm not finished with the book, but I'm in the middle of it. And even as a seasoned sales professional, as I consider myself, and I'll not be modest here, I'm good at it. But the book really, it reminds you of principles that sometimes we let ourselves get away from, and then it refreshes some viewpoints that allow you to, with an open mind, say, those are principles that I haven't embraced and I really should. And the only problem I see with your book is that it forces you to reflect on those deals that maybe you didn't do as well as you wanted to or that you lost. And it makes you go, you know what? I should have done, a stakeholder analysis. That's where I missed. I should have done. And so when you force us to be retrospective like that, man, sometimes it's painful.
It's funny about that. I got an email from a young guy who had just started reading the book, and he asked me to give him advice on how to read the book because he's underlining so much. He's underlining more than is left clean inside the book. So he's struggling with, okay, well, how do you do this? And it's an interesting question. I wrote him back saying there's not a right way or a wrong way to read the book, but for my money, you read it once through and you remember all the spots where you might need to shore up any deficiencies you have. And then you go back and you just dive deep on that chapter because every chapter is actionable. But you can't force your way through the book. If you try to do all the actions as you go through the book, there's a lot of work for you to do. So I think that you're right, Jon. It does make you think about some things that you haven't thought about maybe in quite this way. But if you do the work, just read it through and then go back and decide where you really want to spend your time, I think it's going to be a great field guide.
I think it also, I know it's a sales book, but you and I both know this is a book that's bigger than that. It's more of a philosophy on life and approaching interaction, business, family, anything. Really, you can pull a lot of messages out of this thing. So yes, we're talking about stakeholder analysis, but just in terms of discussing a positive attitude, putting down, your phone and focusing on work and managing your time better. You've got a lot in there besides just sales stuff.
Well, the book starts with mindset. And I think that a lot of that, the principles in the first half of the book are going to help you be successful, whatever you do. That's not going to be limited to sales at all.
Yeah, I'd even say the second half of the book, though. You and I have discussed in depth culture and how those things impact people and building trust and consensus and all those kind of things. And that plays into anybody's professional life. You're talking about change management. That's not normally a sales term. That's a business term. And there's throughout the book, there are things and places where you are talking about taking a different perspective, talking about creating value. You create value in everything you do. If you run an accounts payable receivable department, you're creating value. You've got different goals than the other person running the other department has. And if you don't align your goals, you're going to have cultural dissonance. And cultural dissonance is expensive.
Yes, to say the least.
I think I spend a lot of time, and I'm sure you do too, defending sales in your life when people think, I don't like being sold. But the reality is when it's done well, we all as human beings love being sold. Because when sales is done right, it's guidance toward a situation that changes for the better for everybody. And that's another highlight of the book that I think not a lot of people get enough of. When you talk about your reputational damage, when you create a deal that's one-sided, things like that. Now we're not talking about selling a product and taking compensation from somebody for that product. Now we're talking about like Pete said, negotiating things in your life, dealing with your family. The stakeholder analysis holds true for everybody. You have to look at your family and go, you know what? Mom's going to be mad if we do this. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, she's not going to be, because she's going to get something she wants out of the deal. We're going to take the treehouse down or whatever the thing is. And then you realize that, well, if we take the treehouse down, it's going to make Dad be able to mow the lawn around the tree a little better. And, and you start to pick apart who benefits from every action in your life, and you realize the impact that you have. And you're able to be a little more conscious of it and a little more thoughtful for the footprint you leave in your life and your family and with everybody around you.
We're not taking the treehouse down, though. We're not actually talking about that. The treehouse stays. As far as I'm concerned, everyone needs a treehouse. It's interesting about the idea that people love to buy, but they don't love to be sold. In fact, we do love to be sold. I think you're right about that, John. You look at what Tim Cook does, picking up from what Steve Jobs did, and there's a room full of people waiting to be sold that new phone, the new iPad. There's a group of people
who want to pay for it.
They want to pay for it. We're aspirational, and when we see things that we think can further our cause, we love to be seduced by an idea. And we love to think that we can improve what we're doing and that we can buy things that will help us improve whatever it is. It could be improving, our relationships. It could be improving some aspect of our life. But we do love that. And I think that what I tried to convey in the second half of the book really was about the way that we sell. And you're right, it is about change management. And it is about making sure that people are taken care of and that they get what they want and that you're creating value for everyone. And when you don't do those things, you end up not really making change. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to make things better. We're here to create value for others and to do this kind of work. Those of us that are called to do it, to extend what we've traditionally thought about sales, to starting to think about what do we do when you're dealing with a group of people and you're really trying to make change. And it's a very different job than what's been described in a lot of sales books before now.
That's for sure. Your approach to it is you're sort of the Zen master of sales, if anything, because you do talk about presence. You talk about getting to know, and these are things that you and I, again, have discussed in depth, getting to know not just the stakeholders, but the people around, the people that you're trying to influence to improve their condition. So if you're going to say something contrary to what their best friend, in their department says, or what their boss says, who protects their livelihood, you don't just get to walk in and just say the opposite thing. You've got to earn trust, and not just with your immediate partner, but with the stakeholders around you, the people that matter. And if you don't spend time in that village getting to know those people, your neck was cut 2 days ago and you didn't even know it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's way more influence inside than you have from the outside in most cases.
You also have a podcast that I love. I listen to it all the time. Most importantly about your podcast is that your theme song kicks fucking ass. Have you heard this thing, John?
Yeah, of course. I don't know that that's the most important thing, but okay.
Well, Anthony used to front a rock and roll band
growing
up, and he's always talking about that. So it's pretty dang cool that he's got this rock and roll song, and we just got coffee delivered. So that was fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
But
delivery's good.
I love your podcast, and I'm always inspired by your guests. How do you get these people?
I study, and then I hunt them down, and I follow them. Before we get there, though, I will say that is a guy named Chris Cernell, and he goes by Oh Hush, and he's a Grammy. I think he's won a Grammy now, but he writes for all kinds of pop stars whose names people who know who pop stars are, they would know the names. I don't know the names, but Ariana Grande, that kind of people. He writes for those people. So I commissioned him to write that for me, and he produced it and put the musicians together to do that theme song for In the Arena. And basically, I just gave him the idea. We had zero conversation and zero revisions. He showed up and he handed that back to me, and I thought it was perfect just the way it was.
Boy,
and
we don't get to buy like that very often.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's why it's good.
Just a referral from my buddy Chris Brogan, who said you should reach out to Chris. So that's what I did, and it turned out aces.
And I don't want to glaze over
for
because I want.
Guests.
I was going to say I want our listeners to make sure that they go get it. It's called In the Arena. You can get it on iTunes and Stitcher and every place where you listen to podcasts. But you can also get it at thesalesblog.com, and that's where you should go.
The guests there mostly come from my interests, and I have a lot of people who want to come on the show because of they have a sales product or a technology or something, but I don't find that as interesting for the audience as people like Ken Wilber and Bob Keegan, who both do a lot of work around developmental psychology, or John Robb, who does, who wrote Brave New War, who does a lot of work thinking about artificial intelligence and guerrilla warfare now that we have digital tools. Pete, you were a guest because I wanted to talk about culture. And I think these things are more interesting to round out the discussion that we have about sales and success and meaning and purpose and work. I think it's just a much more interesting approach to come at it through some other angle than just through straight sales. That's why I pursue those guests. And that's why I really want to bring more of that to people so that they get different flavors and different views.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to approach things. And by coalescing all of these different disciplines and, people like John Robb and myself who've got combat type experience, you're definitely going to get different perspectives. And I'm a big believer on gathering perspective. If I can gather perspective, I'm less likely to be egocentric. And if I'm less egocentric, then I'm more attuned to the culture in the room around me. And I'm better able to see things that are hard for me to understand. I don't have to agree with what I see, but I have to see it. And then I have to learn how to leverage it to my advantage. So if I can use your culture to accomplish my goal, we're both winning because I'm keeping it normal for you and I'm accomplishing the goal that I want. And that's a different way to look at win-win. But if this is so normal what I build and I use here's an example we had done, military was going to give up books. And we want to go, and the military is going to give up books to get a military benefit. No, you don't do that. That's great, but what you really want to do is say, hey, Jaish al-Mahdi, the doesn't matter. It's a group that is politically and combative, important in the southern part of Iraq with Shias. If you go there and say, Jaish al-Mahdi is pro-education, and so are we. So on behalf of Jaish al-Mahdi, we're going to hand these books that are in Arabic that are appropriate for you guys. We're going to give them to you on behalf of them. Well, now Jaish al-Mahdi has to say, we're not for education. And they're not going to do that. So you use their very thing that they say. You take their exact words and say, we're doing this together. We don't have to agree on everything, but on education, we agree. This is important for kids to get smarter. And you can't fight that.
Yeah. Alignment.
Your book is full of, was it 19 chapters? I've read the whole thing. It's fantastic. Give us an idea of the chapters where you were really inspired on what you were writing, thinking, I'm really saying something that hasn't been said before, or this is the best stuff that I've ever written. I know that that's the case for you. So can you expand on some of that?
Yeah, the first half of the book is all mindset. And the interesting backstory on this is a publisher came to me and they said, we want you to write a book with us. And as somebody who, writes a blog, I was flattered that somebody wants me to write a book, and it feels good when you get that call. But I handed over the general structure for the book and a lot of text, and it was laid out this way. It started with self-discipline and then went into optimism and then into caring. And the first acquisitions editor look at when they read it, they just basically said, we don't like it. We don't understand it. We don't know why self-discipline is in a sales book. We certainly don't know why caring is in. And the second half of the book where all the sales stuff is, we like that, but it's only half a book. And we wish you would expand that. And I pushed back and I said, you've never sold before, have you? And the acquisition editor said, no, I've always been an editor. And I said, well, I've never been an editor, but I've been a salesperson and a sales leader and an entrepreneur and a business owner. And I can tell you that the first half of the book matters before you get to the second half of the book. And it didn't matter what I said. He didn't believe it, and he didn't want to publish that book, which was his prerogative. But I didn't want to publish the book that he wanted to publish. And basically, he said, let me go to your blog and pull down enough posts that I can cobble a book together out of it. And I said, no, it's not the book that I want to give to salespeople. I want to give them a book that they can use to produce better results right now. I don't want to do a different book than that. He said, why don't you write a consultant's book? And I didn't want to write that book either. I wasn't writing a book to get work, even though there's a lot of people that write books so that they can get work. And I pushed back enough times. I got a second publisher interested, and that group just wasn't right for me. So I decided to self-publish the book because I felt so strongly about the mindset coming before the skill set. So even just taking it into my own hands, I was inspired to write the mindset because I would go out and look at sales organizations, and the manager would say, this translates to just any part of business anyway. The manager would say, this person's not making their number. Well, that's the presenting problem, but it's not the root cause. And then I would look for the root cause and say it's because they have no discipline. They can't discipline themselves to do their prospecting work, to follow up, to do the work they need to learn what they need to serve their customer. They're not disciplined. That's the root cause. Or I would look and say, this person's a dependent. They don't come up with any ideas on their own. They're not resourceful enough. And I think the military has a term for it that I've learned that's called FITFO. It's figure it out. So
Yes.
with more expletives in the middle of it. This is not a clean show anyway, right?
No, you can say it if you want to. You can also say RTFM. Read the fucking manual.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing. But I would look and say this person's not resourceful and they're not coming up with the next idea, so they get stuck and they don't do anything about it. And it turns out that most of the time we can teach skills, but nobody pays any attention to the mindset and the beliefs and the belief structures that are driving actions or preventing actions more likely. And I wanted to cover that ground first because when you get to the second half of the book, if you're not the kind of person who can do this work, then you're not going to do very well. And ultimately, when Portfolio reached out to me to ask me if I'd written a book or why I hadn't, and I sent them the book, they understood immediately this is a very different book. And the mindset chapters are so different for a sales book. We understand completely. And honestly, that's where I've gotten the most feedback from readers that are so grateful that that part is there because nobody said anything like this before. And from sales managers and sales leaders, they're looking at it going, we talk about these competencies all the time, but we don't know what they are and we don't know what to do about them. That's really, I was inspired to write that half of the book for sure. And then in the second half, I guess just the behind the scenes kind of thing, the last chapter on differentiation, the first time I wrote that, I gave it to the editor that I hired to edit the book. And he basically sent me back the chapter saying, just delete it and don't even have a last chapter because what you wrote adds nothing to the book. And when people get to that last chapter, they're in a very different place having read all this and you're not adding enough. And I thought, wow, that's harsh, but that's why you hire an editor because you want somebody to push you to do your best work. And I deleted the whole chapter and I started over. So I was definitely inspired to do that because I love a challenge. So when somebody says something's not good enough, it's always fun to try to make it better. And then we ended up with a much better close to the book than we would have had he not pushed me.
But you started that story off with the publisher's editor and that you pushed back on the publisher's editor. And that really reminds me of the negotiation description that you give in the book, where sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from the deal because it's not best for everybody. And that editor, I'm sure, was passionate about his point, but ultimately you walked away from that deal not just because it wasn't the way that you wanted to write the book and it wasn't the message that you thought that sales professionals like us needed to get, and that you needed to set the table and put us in the right mindset and remind us of those principles before we started on technique. The walking away from that deal is a great demonstration of what you describe, because that wasn't the best book for the publisher either. He just didn't realize that.
No, he wanted a book by a consultant that would get the consultant more work. So he was looking for a different kind of a frame than I had. And fair enough. I mean, he reached out and asked a second time and tried to find a way to reach an agreement, but I didn't want to write that book. And when you write a book, you're writing it because you believe something and you have some message that you want to share and you want people to do something different, believe something different. It didn't make sense for me to do something that wasn't aligned with that, whatever it was. And I think his intentions were good. He was thinking, how do I help you write a book that will get you more business? But I wasn't thinking about writing a book to get more business. I was thinking about how do I serve the people that I serve with the blog? I mean, how do I serve the people who actually need to know how to do things? And it was more important for me to do that than it was to have a book deal. So they're fine. They're still in business without my book. They had no trouble. They've got a lot of people writing books for them.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to that cross-cultural collaboration. You guys had a different goal. And you recognize, so when you get in the right quadrant, you're collaborative. When you're in the other quadrants, there's incompetence perceptions, there's passive aggressiveness, there's just corruption perceptions or greed. And those are the things when I always encourage people, when you feel those things, you're likely not aware of the decision-making process of the other person and then their goals. And vice versa. They need to be aware of your goals and your decision-making process. And if you guys can say, well, we're just not agreeing on this, it's okay to say, let's not do this. You're not bound to each other.
That's right. And it's okay. The only thing for salespeople is you need to have enough opportunities that you're not starving, so you have the power to walk away. I mean, that's if you want to be a good negotiator, you've got to have the power to walk away from a bad deal. And not just a bad deal for you, a bad deal for them too. I mean, if it's not going to serve your client, you don't want that deal either. It's going to be your undoing later on when people say this person sold me something that didn't produce the results that they promised. So you just have to have enough going on that you can walk away from anything that doesn't serve you or the other party.
And this goes right back to the first part of your book and having the right mindset to get these things set up so that you can have a pipeline that's strong and robust. And you're able to say that, maybe not today is the time for us to do this deal. We know what we do now, each other, and maybe we'll find something down the road. In the meantime, I've got other opportunities I'm going to go pursue, and so do they.
That's right.
You write.
We play the long game.
Yeah, you play the long game, right? You write a blog basically daily. Do you write on the weekends as well too, or just during the business week?
Yeah.
So
no, every day, weekends included.
Every day, 500 words. It'll change your life. You told me those words, and I'm still working on getting to my 500 words a day. I do spend a lot more time on the keyboard. It does change your life. I can say that for sure. You wrote something recently about content, and Jon and I are in the content creation business. We are constantly urging people to create content, and you see the content world maybe a little differently than us. Can you talk about your thoughts on creating content and the value or the perception of that there's value when there's not really value there?
Which post are you referring to?
You talked about content selling, I think is what it was.
More of a content marketing kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I would just tell you, I think that there's different kinds of content that serve different markets. The reason that I write every day is because I don't believe that who needs your content or when they're going to find it, but Google does. And when somebody types in a search term, Google brings them to the content that you write. And I basically think that from a sales perspective and from an influence perspective, you need to just create content and put it out into the universe. I think you and I talked about this when we were eating maybe the hottest chicken I've ever eaten somewhere on Mission Street in San Francisco.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
do us a favor.
Yeah, share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating. Give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now back to the show.
And I think both of us had to order a second glass of water and try to deal with that. Whatever that was, it was great. But I think that if you have content, it's interesting that when you write, the thing that you wrote that you believe so strongly is what people need, and you love it, and you slave over it, and you put it out into the world, and it makes no noise at all. And then you've got this content that's a complete throwaway idea that you think, I'm just going to put it out there. It's not really great. That's the thing that people respond to and say, this changed my life. This was exactly what I needed when I needed it. You just don't know what you're doing, but you think about, does this idea serve other people? And if it does, you create the content. Seth Godin writes every day too, and I can't imagine anybody writing every day thinking about, is this going to serve everybody that comes across my blog? Of course it's not. It's not the right content for them today. But because you have Google working behind you all the time, helping people find the content they need when they need it, you go ahead and write because you're bringing a lot of people in. I'm going to pull up my stats right now from yesterday. When you look at the post activity that I had, probably less than 10% of it, I'm going to call it somewhere near 5% of it, was the post that I wrote that day. And then out of, call it 3,000 views, the rest of it were other posts that are still working behind the scenes, and Google's bringing people there. So that's it. I mean, there are people who go out and find this post I wrote about 7 things you can do to be better at prospecting. That thing brings in hundreds of views a day, every day, and it's an old post. I don't even remember when I wrote it, but it was probably 2010. That post is still working, and that's why I think it's important to create every day, because Google will bring the people who need you to you. It'll help you do that. It's not the only thing you should do, but it'll definitely be helpful.
This is one of the benefits of the podcast game as well. We have posts from people that loved a given actress or pop singer or whatever from years and years ago, and they just want a little more of that person, and then they can go back and now they can find it from someone that's, not terribly notable now, but there is a really fresh, fun interview. And we have all the time shows from early on when John and I first started that still get hits all the time and still are one of the strongest shows that we have several years later. So that for sure happens. The other thing too about podcasts and creating media in general is when you create that message, you can link back to other things too. So if you and I do a podcast on your show, we can link back to your earlier podcast or my appearance on your show. And that also continues to give life in a relevant way to expand on what we talked about before. We have guests all the time, like you now, that come on, and you can't capture the Anthony Iannarino story in 1 hour. It takes more than an hour to do that.
This is number 2 for me, I think, on Break It Down.
That's right.
Is it number 2 or number 3?
I think it's number 2.
Okay.
But we want number 3, though.
Yeah.
Because, again, these stories are great. They're lush, and you constantly are evolving. Peter Drucker wrote a zillion books about business and changed his mind a number of times and evolved over the course of things. You're doing the same thing. You're constantly writing, constantly evolving, constantly seeing things from new ways, and you're ahead of us in so many different areas. It's great to have someone like you on.
Well, and as the marketplace changes, and it always does, whether it's the marketplace or just as the landscape changes, and as we evolve as people interacting with the landscape, fresh perspectives or reminders of old perspectives that we had to reprioritize down the ladder in the past are always helpful. You always have to look and relook and refresh the way you're coming at things based on, the changing tides and your changing views and your changing ability to benefit those around you.
That's an interesting point, because we're closing in on the end of the year when we're recording this. It's December 10th, and I'm getting ready to write a newsletter where I've already sketched out the notes about, if you go from year to year without changing what you believe and changing your perspective, you're just going to repeat the same year you had this year next year. And I keep a running list of beliefs that I've changed. Some of them private, some of them I'm willing to share. But it is important to think about what are you willing to change your mind about. And it's important that your perspective changes and that you do change your mind, because that's growth. So if you have some feelings about business and you believe those so strongly that you can't change, you're Blockbuster. That story doesn't end well for Blockbuster. It ends well for Netflix so far. Or you're Kodak, who, one employee of Kodak invented the digital camera. That wasn't interesting to Kodak. And they had a set of beliefs that said people want camera with film. And now we know that that's not true. Kodak didn't believe that was true. And there's just story after story. If you get stuck in a set of beliefs and you're not willing to take in new information, it's one of those Eric Shinseki quotes, my favorite quote. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And you have to continue to evolve and bring new ideas in and see how they stand up, and then change your mind about things.
Well, that was strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, it really is the end of the year is a great place to see and understand that.
Yeah.
Because I'm still kind of digesting that whole comment. And now I'm going through my mental inventory and seeing what I can shuck.
Yeah.
And what I can change my mind about. And the easiest thing, of course, to think about is, are the things that are going to affect your wallet or your income.
Right.
And to see if there are any mind-changing practices you can exact there to help yourself out. But, it gets much more philosophical than that. And the impact just gets deeper as well.
This continues to do your book design is fantastic, and I'm really getting this out of this show. So you have to constantly evolve and innovate. Innovator dies, another great quote. But that has to be rooted in that first part of the book, in flexing the muscle. And John and I see this all the time across we talk to, as you know, we talk to a lot of different people, musicians, creative people that are the best in the world at what they do. And what they all do is they all get in the workshop and they produce product. If it's not the blog for that person that day, it's not your favorite blog that you wrote, it does not matter, because you flexed the muscle, because the greatness comes out of that work. The inspiration comes from continuing. When the hardest days come, that's where the inspiration comes from. It may come 2 months down the road, but to a guest, they all have that same thing where I didn't know what I was going to do, so I just kept doing what I do. And then something positive happened right when I needed it.
There's a guy in Columbus today who's playing, he's got a band. I forget his name. He's a friend of a friend. But he's playing all 275 or 298 of the recorded Beatles songs.
Wow.
In the order that they were written, straight through from beginning to end. And apparently it starts early this morning and it goes all the way till nighttime. And he's got a band who can play this off, and they can pull it off and play all these Beatles songs. But I think they had 16 number one hits.
That's right.
That's a lot of number one hits. But out of 298 songs, so if you want to create something great, you have to create. You're not going to write a number one hit because you sat down to write a number one hit. It's all of the, call it 30 to 40 songs between the number one hits that start to stack up. And when you look at somebody like Sly and the Family Stone, right? Yeah. You interviewed Sly. He had hits, but not everything was a hit. Those hits were the work that he did as a writer and a creator, and you continue to create, and you have some hits and you have some misses, but they're all part of the same process. And I think that's right. That's what we should think about as human beings, because at some level we're all artists, we're all creators, we're all resourceful. We all have the ability to be creative, even though through most of your school life after grade school, they try to crush that out of you and make you, mostly left brain, mathematical, logical, rather than allowing that part of the human experience to flourish. But it's true. The more you create, the more you flex that muscle, the stronger it gets. And then the more you create, the more you have a chance of creating something that's good.
Yeah, there's a pyramid of work that comes out of those 16 number one or 30 for Elvis, whatever that number one hit chart that you're going to create and whatever it is that you do, that requires 300 or so songs to be recorded, which requires 3,000 or so songs to be written. And within that work of the daily writing of songs, you're going to have little pieces of ideas, and maybe those ideas don't go together in that day. But again, you reach back and you have a body of work to pull from. And the long game in the songwriting game is to keep writing. Sly Stone writes music every single day, still to this day. It's what he does. Even if he's not producing new music, he has to do that because that's what he is.
Yeah, we celebrate the hits, but anybody in the game is like, I really knocked him out that time. But you know what? I get in the batter's box and I swing the bat.
Yeah.
And I swing the bat every day. And sometimes I knock one out.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to hear the 2,500 or so songs that Prince already had recorded when he died that were sitting, in his vault?
Yeah, absolutely. He recorded a song every day.
Who knows what's in there?
And there is, and I love Prince, there's a heaping helping a crap in there. And I say that to
Yeah.
discourage the creators, to encourage the creators, because you got to be willing to sift through. It's the old sales adage, right? Some will, some won't. Next.
Yeah.
And the songwriting process is the same, where, I'm going to churn this one out. And at the end, I may look at it and go, not my best. But tomorrow I'm going to do another one. And, sometimes you stumble upon your best. Like you said, the days when it happens, you don't know what's going to happen that morning.
Right.
Harry Connick Jr. Talked about discipline the same way. And I heard him say years ago in an interview, I sit down at my piano and I write between 10 and 1 every day. And, sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it comes right out of me. But I know I have to do it every day, because the days that I don't think it's going to happen, sometimes those are the days that it happens.
Those people also that do that, Prince, Harry Connick Jr., anybody, Mozart, all those guys wrote, and they write in the present right now, but they're constantly evolving their thoughts, right? So, and we talked to this wonderful guy. If you ever get a chance to consume any of his work, I definitely encourage anybody, listeners, but also you, Anthony. His name is Dr. Robert Greenberg, and he knows everything about what we would call classical music. And guys like Beethoven, they wrote for instruments that weren't even invented yet. The piano of the time only had, say, 60 keys instead of 88. Well, he was writing music that was to the right of those 60 some odd keys, because this is what you do when you get in the workshop. You discover ideas and you expand what's possible. So Prince may have things that don't make even sense right now, but 10 years down the line, the right person can come that bit of a song, take that bit of a song and create new brilliance out of it. You just don't know what's there if you don't ever create it.
And for the Prince fans out there because we have a lot of Prince fans who listen to our show, who go, "Oh, come on, Pete, really?" I'll remind you of the song by the Family called "Nothing Compares to You."
Yeah.
It was a steaming hunk of crap.
Right. Yeah.
Until Sinead O'Connor got a hold of it, and suddenly she breathed new life into it and interpreted it a little differently, and you went, "No, that's a good song." So you're right, it happens, and sometimes you throw something out there and you go, "Not my best," and then somebody else gets a hold of it and says, "You know what? Let me try it."
Yeah.
And you have something better than you thought you had.
Well, and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones made a lot of money doing that, taking something that already existed and saying, "Let me take a crack at this."
I hate that we've derailed this conversation. No, I don't. I don't hate that we've derailed this conversation. We have an ongoing debate, Anthony, about the song "Got to Get You Into My Life," which was a Beatles song that I wasn't crazy about until Earth, Wind, and Fire got a hold of it.
Yeah.
And, that's one of those songs. I mean, Respect by Aretha Franklin, not hers. That was an Otis Redding song.
Otis Redding.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
His version of it was not great. Our point, though, is that if we create every day, sometimes we create gems that we don't realize that we've created, or we don't realize that are gems.
I'm going to ask Anthony a question so we can bring him back into our conversation. From our experience in talking to wonderful people and the threads that we get to gather together, we talk to music makers, and music makers are trying to create an effect, an affect. So a guy like Preston Glass that's written these lush ballads, or we talked to a guy, we haven't even published a show yet, James Stemple, who does scoring for movies. He's trying to create a given feeling or emotion. He might use a certain chord on a guitar, and you know about this from your rock and roll days. What are those tools that a salesperson can use or a business person can use to start to create an affect? Forget the effect, because you can write all the love letters you want. If the person doesn't love you, you can't make them love you by continuing to write 1,000 letters.
Hold on. Was that a fucking beautiful transition right there? Man. Transition man. That was fucking awesome.
Yeah, so,
I think that I think I wouldn't say just salespeople, but if you think about people who lead, people who have to help other people change, I think that the tools are really meaning and purpose and creating value and doing things that make a difference. And I think that this is where salespeople and sales organizations are generally weak, because mostly we're solution oriented. So we say, you have a problem, let us solve the problem. And that can work. And there's a lot of I guess, evidence that if somebody understands the implication and the consequences of not changing and they want to change, that's a good place to be. But I think it's deeper than that now. And I think that a lot of people are still suffering from post traumatic recessionary stress disorder after 2 downturns, in 10 years. And they're afraid of change. And I think it's the big tools for us are the why. I mean, if you want to hit the right notes, why do we do this? What purpose does it serve? What meaning does it bring to our lives and our mission? And a lot of people are afraid to go there. They're afraid to talk about those kind of aspirational ideas. And not just salespeople, leaders are afraid to talk about those kinds of things. And really, if you want people to be aligned around change, I say this to leaders a lot. If you want to help people change, you have to see something in them that they don't see in themselves, and then help bring that to life. And so, if you don't want to go there, it's pretty impotent. The powerful part's actually talking about why. Why do we do what we do? Why does it matter? Who are you going to become by doing this work? Those are the things that make a big difference.
I like the how questions. You can read a book about being a good leader, be a good leader by being this, being that, by doing this. But how, what are the pieces to that do and that being? If I'm going to build trust, be trustworthy. Well, what the fuck does that mean? How do I become that? What's the mechanism? How can I envision this? And so it's funny.
You're going to have to wait for a future book, because I only write how books. And that the book that I wrote was a how book, because I feel the same way you do. I read sales books and I think that's a great concept. How do I put it into practice?
Yes.
And the one thing that I insisted on doing, and I'm insisting on this in the second book too, and I spoke to the editor after I turned the book in to say, this is there's 2 kinds of books. There's I books, and then there's you books. And the I books are, I did this. This is my story. I can do this. I can do this other thing. There's a lot of sales books like that. But I write you books. You can do this. You can do that. And here's how you can do some of these things, because that's what people want. They want to know, how do I do it? And I look at a lot of sales books and business books generally and think, that's great, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. How do you implement this? But the implementation is where all the value in the book is. I mean, reading the book and then not doing anything with it is the same as not reading the book. So you have to actually give people a key. And at the end of every chapter in the Only Sales Guide, it says, do this now. I mean, we were as prescriptive and directive as we could be. It literally says, do this now, because we want you to do something with the content you just read.
Yeah, this is one of the strongest things, and I'm glad you said that, because it's better when you say it than I say it. But at the end of each chapter, like you said, do this now. And then where do you want to find more about this? If this topic, this chapter resonates with you, go to these 2 sources and go read these books, or go chew through what's in here content-wise. So it's fantastic. It's talking about your how thing. You talk about how you read books. And if you would, give us your little blurb about that, because I know you read them and you listen to them and you do several things to really consume the book.
That is probably one of the biggest, when you talk about shedding certain beliefs, right? What's interesting about that is I used to believe I had to read a book a week. And literally I would work to make sure that I would read 1 book a week. And you're looking at my library here because you have the video on. I have the video on anyway. And I would just read a book. But then at some point, I started to think about, how much am I really getting out of the effort I put into reading a book? A 240-page book is about, 6 hours of reading, probably in that neighborhood for people. So you're giving $25 and 6 hours of your time to something. And it's something that somebody probably put 20,000 hours into and learning the content in there. And it doesn't make sense to me anymore to plow through it. So I'm now picking a book that I want to really digest. And rather than worrying about the time it takes me to digest it, I'm worried about what do I get as a return on my time invested and the energy invested. So the first thing I tend to do is just read a book from cover to cover. And I'm doing it on Kindle. So I highlight passages, because Amazon gives you the nice page where you have all the passages that you can clip out without having to retype them. So I like that. If it's something I'm really trying to learn and I'm going to spend the time to do it, I'll get the audio book at the same time. And if it's not available in audio, I might listen to something else by the same author. Ken Wilber I interviewed for the podcast, and some of his stuff isn't available on audio, but it's available on audio in other forms, which is basically the same content another way. But I want to listen too, because I learn by listening. And what that allows me to do is to have the book on when I'm driving, when I'm in the shower, when I'm on an airplane. After I've listened and done one read through, I read it a second time, specifically for what am I going to do now that I've read this? What am I going to change? What beliefs did I change? What new actions am I going to take? And I'll give you a couple ideas about books that I thought were good enough to read through this way a couple times lately. There's a book by a guy named Greg McKeon called Essentialism. And it's a little book about just paring everything down to what's essential and really doing good work in a certain area. That book I read, I listened to, I read again, and then I decided what changes I was going to make as I read it the second time. Ken Wilber, who I interviewed and talked about, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality is a massive book. It's probably 530 pages, but with the footnotes, it's 870.
Wow.
And it took me a couple times through that book to start figuring out how do you apply this massive framework of understanding essentially human cultural development on every single level. How do you think about applying that to your work? And it's not an easy transition. So the book takes a long time to read. The audio book doesn't exist, but there is a book called Cosmic Consciousness with a K, where it's just Ken being interviewed for 12 hours. And that 12 hours of listening made reading Sex, Ecology, Spirituality second time easier. And now I've been able to start applying, his 4 quadrants to my work and start thinking about things in a very different way. But I don't think it makes sense for you to read books as fast as you can and then not do anything with them. And it would be better to pick one book and take a deep dive into that book and actually get all of the marrow out of the bone and then decide to go on to the next book after you did something with the first one. So that's one of those changes that I've made where I changed what I believed. I believed that you just have to keep up with all the reading, that whenever a new book that's interesting comes out, you have to read it. Not true.
Yeah.
If you read it and don't do anything with it, you didn't read it.
Yeah, and I would even say that you have got another media or another technique for consuming that book. You're also thinking about it, contemplating it, chewing it back out, and spitting it out in blog pieces. And you're also having conversations about it. So you're using all these different areas of your brain to teach yourself what you're learning and to consider it and put that perspective that you've gathered into your work. And all of that stuff is continuing to chew and use that book up in a way that makes sense. You and I have a conversation about somebody you met. We did this when we had that lunch in the Mission. You talked about a guy that you had met in Colorado and how
Ken,
that, yeah, exactly. And how that was changing how you were seeing things. That's you still reading that book because you're going to continue to open up doors and realize things. You teach me, like I listened to the show that we did together because I teach myself when I hear like the things that I said. I'm like, gosh, there's so much more in here that I understand now, that even in that time, in that moment back in the spring when we did that show, I wasn't capable of understanding where even I was in my own thoughts. So continuing to find ways to revisit that material, you're right. It doesn't matter just how many books you've read. It's the weight that you can pull out of that book and then how you use it in your life. I think it's a fantastic way to look at consuming a book. I've been through your book 2 times now straight through listening. It continues to deliver. So I definitely thank you for writing such a fantastic book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. The audio recording was difficult. That's a tougher exercise than you think.
Yeah, I was going to ask how long that took to do. I mean, because you're talking about 6+ hours of reading, but I know from. And did you edit that yourself? So
No. We went into a studio, but it took me 8 hours of reading to do that, and it made for a long day. I can tell you that much. I don't know what I'll do with the second one.
Yeah, that's a real challenge because it's a linear time thing. So the minimum is, if it takes 6.5 hours to read, the minimum would be 6.5 hours, and you're never going to get it in one take, one sitting. You have to take breaks.
No way.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So thank you for doing that, because when I read, I find that I get distracted if I sit down and just open a book. I used to be voracious in reading, especially when I was in combat zones, because it was a good way to take my mind off of what I was doing. But now I've got to read by walking and listening so that occupying my senses enough that I can go and get that stuff to actually stick in my brain. Otherwise, I read and my brain goes somewhere else. So it's great to have that audio. So please make sure you record it because that helps me read that thing.
It's one of those things. It's not up to me. The publisher sells the rights, and when they sell the rights, you get to audition to read the book. It's not always just cut and dry that you get to. But I asked for first right to audition, and fortunately, the publisher that bought it, they wanted me to read it, so that was good. It worked out that way.
Well, then let me give you this plug that you can use the next time you write a book. Anthony should read every book that he writes because your voice, you see what you wrote, you know the page in your head, and you've got more detail, and you can affect that more competently than Gary Sinise can. Gary Sinise can outact you in the book, but you're talking about a different skill set, so please keep doing that.
I would take Gary Sinise, that would work. Or Peter Coyote, the actor who read The Four Agreements.
Right.
Man, if you listen to him read that book, he's perfect for it. That would be a good one, too.
What do you read?
If I get to pick.
Yeah, no, if you get to pick, for sure. Peter Coyote's not a bad pick. Gary Sinise, never a bad pick. What female would you pick to read your stuff?
Would I get to be in the studio with her? That's the question.
Absolutely.
That's a great question.
What female would I pick?
And is she going to read it like Diana Ross?
Yeah.
style?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to think about that. I have to stay married too, so whatever I say,
Well, it doesn't have to.
needs
Yeah.
to be very.
Yeah.
It has to be measured. Gwyneth Paltrow.
Okay, perfect. Leave it at that right
Yeah.
there. Yeah. So
Or Roz Zanders. I don't know how old Roz is, but I interviewed her. She wrote Pathways to Possibility, and her husband was Ben Zander. That's a great interview on the podcast. Just because I love her spirit. Her spirit's so great. I would have her read it.
let me ask you this. Let's play a real quick game here. We like to recast movies. So what movie needs to be remade? And let's recast that thing real quick.
Because it was done so horribly, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the remake was so awful, it needs to be recast and it needs to be done again.
Okay. Who do you want in the different roles?
I want Christopher Walken to play Willy Wonka.
Oh boy.
I mean, there's no question about it. That was that's how it should have been cast the second time it was made. That would be the best Wonka that you could have.
That's a great choice.
But beyond that, it doesn't matter who the rest of the cast is on the younger people. But I would like to see Christopher Walken play Willy Wonka.
All right. I like it. And so it's a darker movie even still than what it was before?
I don't know. I think that he could capture. First off, nobody would ever do better than Gene Wilder. Impossible.
Right.
He is Willy Wonka. There's no question about it. But I think Walken would bring something even more. I don't know if necessarily darker, but there would definitely be something even more mysterious about Wonka with Christopher Walken playing that character. And he's got the ability to deliver a different kind of cruelty than Gene Wilder did. Gene Wilder's cruelty about these kids is funny in the way that he does it, but for Walken, it would have a different flavor.
Yeah, I maybe would like to see it be even.
I'm smiling just thinking about it.
Yeah, I would love to maybe see it be really bright and sunshiny and beautiful and just so sweet and everything that it absolutely could not be true. And then you got this not lunatic, but this person that's just like, there's no way that this guy really is this happy and like, what is coming? And then every time something comes, you're like, that's more about what I thought this guy was going to be.
Yeah. I like the exercise of recasting movies. That's fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We do it all the time. I'd like to try to figure out how to redo Smokey and the Bandit, but it's hard to find the vehicle because Coors isn't hard to get anymore.
It's true. Burt Reynolds, that's another character. That's a really tough guy to recast.
I would love to see.
Since we live in California, we could redo Smokey and the Bandit, but have something to do with weed.
Weed or meth or something. Yeah. I would like to see the prequel.
I don't know what meth has to do with California.
Well, just in general, because it's illegal to, make and move around, but you can have a lovable guy,
I think you can have a lovable guy move weed around.
Okay.
I don't think you can have a lovable guy move meth around.
Coke? It's got to be dangerous.
Burt Reynolds has such a good sense of humor. I don't know of any of the actors today that have that same kind of that carry themselves that well.
There's got to be.
I wouldn't mind seeing Zac Efron do a young Bo.
James Franco.
James Franco? Okay. Yeah, James Franco could do it. They've got to be able to be
Interesting
funny. Yeah, exactly. Or his brother. His brother could do it, maybe.
Who's his brother?
Other Franco.
Yeah, other Franco.
I didn't even know he had a brother.
Kid gets a lot of roles.
He does.
He
gets
works.
work. I can't think of his name right now, but yeah. Yeah, it would be fun to see the early Bo Darvel and what he did to get to the point where Smokey and the Bandit Day happens. So see the prequel and have whoever it's going to be.
You know who could do that and pull it off in a way that's a little less charismatic than, or a different brand of charisma. Certainly not quite as sex symbol-y as Burt Reynolds, because nobody does that better than he did. But the guy who played Kenny Powers, what is his name? You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly.
No.
Eastbound
Don't
and Down.
know.
Yeah.
He was also in.
He could play Snowman, maybe. Actually, you know who wants to play Snowman? Justin Timberlake.
Yeah,
I think he would be an awesome
It's a good
Snowman.
cast.
Yeah.
That's good casting.
Who would you want to have as a sheriff? Because that's big and important role in that movie.
There's nobody that's going to do a better job.
Yeah,
That's a
who could
tough one,
fill
too.
Jackie Gleason's shoes, man?